A book means freedom, and not just in a literal sense. We need to see architecture as a way of thinking and not as a final product. This is exactly what happens. You can discover Buenos Aires in one day, or you need your whole life. The guy that took me into the neighborhood was one of the most important drug dealers of Buenos Aires. But I wanted to do it in order to understand the complexity of human interaction. What is our profession? Is giving space. It's amazing how you see that out of the social interaction, a social production of space becomes city.
That is Markus Vogl, Professor in Urban Planning and Design at the University of Stuttgart, Senior Partner at Studio Urban Strategies in Germany, and the former Gropius Chair at the Faculty of Architecture, Design and Urbanism at the University of Buenos Aires, Argentina. Markus completed his studies in architecture at TU Munich in 2002 before continuing on at the University of Vienna up till 2009. He has amassed an incredible portfolio of diverse architectural projects centered around the curiosities of designing places of encounter and social collaboration. My name is Peter Markus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of our environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Markus reflects on the incredible story of what is perhaps his most impactful and life-changing project to date, the Biblioteca La Carcova and Parque Educativo in San Martin, Argentina. We discuss the project's early beginnings, from an unconventional change agent to his involvement in driving a social collaboration towards urban transformation. We also spark deeper thought around architecture's role for future sustainability and what it means to give space. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at peterandbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show. I'm so glad that we finally made it, because radio signals, that was the weirdest experience. We've tried to organize it. Turns out on the 8th floor of Stuttgart University, trying to set up the podcast equipment is not exactly the best idea, because you pick up AM radio signals. Just for the listeners who don't know, we've tried before. And as I was testing the sound quality, I started hearing Christmas songs coming through I don't know whether it's the cables or whether it's something else. And supposedly the cables are pretty good. They're shielded, but I was still picking up a radio signal. So there must have been a studio right next door broadcasting a very strong signal. At least we found a spot. That's not going to bother us.
But in fact, actually, we prepared everything. It was a nice Sunday morning, having a good coffee, having actually quite a nice breakfast.
You brought pastry. That was great.
And then all of a sudden there was this Christmas songs. I never felt it, I mean, this is so weird, because normally you don't listen to, or you don't feel it. And all of a sudden there was this strange noise in our environment. But it was not just in the 8th floor, it was actually throughout the whole building, no?
Well, we did the experiment after that. We tried the ground floor, the 5th floor.
The 5th floor.
And we tried the building next door. And supposedly, these signals travel up in altitude, not down. But glad that we got the chance now. And welcome to the show, Markus.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and also thanks for not giving up making the podcast here in Stuttgart. Now I'm very happy to see.
No, definitely. And we've known each other for quite a bit of time now, and I wanted to seize the opportunity to get to know your story and also some of the incredible journeys you've had as well, because there's one city that I definitely have to go back to, and I haven't been there since 2011, and that is Buenos Aires in Argentina. You've been there quite a few times. When I was there last time, I was absolutely fascinated. It's got a very interesting culture, and the city itself is just super interesting to explore. I remember walking around it for the whole day. Didn't have enough time because I was only there for pretty much a day. It was on stopover via Peru, but definitely have to go back, and looking forward. Any recommendations?
Well, honestly speaking, I think this is exactly what happens. You can discover Buenos Aires in one day, or you need your whole life. Honestly speaking, I'm in between. And in that sense, I definitely need to return. Now, Buenos Aires, some people ask me, how is it being back in Stuttgart after living in this great metropolis? Isn't it boring to be back in Europe, etc.? Yes, to a certain extent it is. Because in Buenos Aires, you wake up and you don't know what's your day.
Okay.
So you need at least you need to have 5 plans. Because for sure, something doesn't work. And this makes you to a certain point very spontaneous, but also somehow a little bit resilient.
Okay.
You know how to react. And if there's a demonstration or manifestation in the center, if there's not electricity or a huge traffic jam on your way to university, so you need 2.5 hours by bus, you just learn how to deal with all these challenges in the everyday. And I think this is where maybe, due to all these global challenges that we are facing, German cities or German society needs to become aware of, that you start to act before you need to react. Maybe that's something that I really learned from Buenos Aires and also the people that I met.
Yeah. You got me thinking about traffic jams, actually. I do remember that massive boulevard. I think it was 7 lanes in both directions. Truly designed for the car. Certainly not necessarily the way we might want to design cities going forward, but I guess we'll get into that. We get a bit ahead of ourselves today. But on that note, on the note of Buenos Aires, how's your tango?
That's also a question. Like people here ask me, Buenos Aires, do you dance tango? Actually, I danced tango as I was a teenager or a young adult in Germany. I went to Milongas in Buenos Aires during the 6 years that I was living there because it's much more, or let's say it didn't fit to my everyday rhythm. And also I didn't have any friends that were really completely up to do the tango. Yeah, but it's quite amazing because like everybody here asks you about Buenos Aires tango.
They make that connection quite automatically.
I mean, it's so easy, but the same as people in Buenos Aires asked me about where do you come from? I said, okay, I'm coming from Munich. And then they said, oh yeah, Bayern Munich and Oktoberfest.
It is true. Every city has a quirk and a stereotype.
But in that sense, I had to say, no, guys, actually, I'm not a supporter of Bayern Munich. I'm a supporter of what we call the Löwen, with the Lions of Munich, working class club in the neighborhood of Munich-Giesing. And actually, due to their colors, to a certain extent, I also chose then being a supporter of Racing Avellaneda, so not of La Boca or of River Plate. So actually, during these years in Buenos Aires, many times I went to the stadium, which was not right in the center, but was really nice of seeing, let's say, a different way of how urban life actually works. And the football is something that is the everyday life, much more than the tango. And giving this sidekick to listening to tango and listening to the lyrics as well as to the song, this is something different. But I would say dancing tango, for sure, there is a certain group also within the city, but honestly speaking, it's also, let's say, one of the touristic parts. Yeah. But the tango in itself tells you a lot about the urban society of Buenos Aires. This
Interesting. Yeah, I do want to pick it up. I mean, I've learned salsa and I quite enjoyed it, but I know tango is a very different kind of dance, a more sensual kind of dance. And I think a few years after I went to Buenos Aires, I actually found out about electro tango. There's this band, they made some really nice music. And yeah, it was just really entrancing when you listen to it. We'll definitely put a link in the show notes so that listeners can also check it out. But yeah, one day, I guess. One day, perhaps.
Yeah, electronic tango by Gotham Project,
exactly.
etc. For sure, that also kept again this idea, okay, what is Argentina, what is Buenos Aires? But maybe also in that sense, tango became much more famous in Europe and in the States. And then it returned to be something for Buenos Aires. Yeah, tango as a dance, right?
Yeah.
But nevertheless, if you listen to tango and you drive the taxi throughout Buenos Aires, this is a very, very dense feeling. So you really feel that the city in its roots to a certain point.
And one aspect about Buenos Aires, which I think really had an influence on your work, it wasn't the tango, maybe not necessarily the football, but it was these Clubes de Barrio, which is, I guess, these spaces you can go to meet people, interact with people, engage in interesting activities. Oftentimes it's, I guess, what you choose or what the group feels like doing at that stage. It's got a bit of a historical context as well to the way Argentina developed and its society, right? Could you tell me a bit about what they are?
Absolutely. Well, during all these years, for sure you teach there, you work there, you do your projects, etc. But for sure, even if you are a foreigner, you become a member of the neighborhood. And this is very interesting. So everybody actually, every porteño, this is how you call the people from Buenos Aires because of port.
Okay.
So every porteño and every porteña, but also let's say the kids, they become member of a club. And the club is something like there is a strange relation towards the state. The clubs are the ones that are organizing everything. They are your social network. Yeah. Like all your life, you are a member of the club. And in that sense, I mean, there are very small ones, but honestly speaking, like also there's football. Yeah? So it's not just the big ones that you know, but in that sense also, I mean, I would have been able to become a member of, let's say, the club of Boca Juniors, for example. I didn't choose for, because I was for sure, let's say, with Racing Avellaneda, but also in your neighborhood, this is the place where you go. If you are in need for something, this is also where your kids go because of doing sports. But also from a certain dimension on, they have in medicine facilities. So I mean,
even medical care.
They care about you. And honestly speaking, I think without this network of 216 clubs just in the center of Buenos Aires, which is, let's say, what we call Capital Federal, that has 3 million inhabitants, whereas the metropolitan area has 50. But within these 3 million inhabitants, you find 216 clubs.
Jeez. And you mentioned it's by neighborhoods, or are there multiples in a single neighborhood?
There are also multiples in a single neighborhood. I mean, this is what maybe in German you could call it Kiez, or in Austria you call it Grätzl. But this is, so to say, a social spatial entity. And the clubs are the center of it.
Mm-hmm.
And this learning, let's say, how the production of social relation works, this is absolutely amazing.
It's like another layer of social governance or social engagement. We have the geopolitical boundaries and sort of the districts and municipal boundaries, but this is, I guess, another layer on top of it, but really designed for society in a way.
Absolutely. And actually they designed them by themselves. So for sure, as Buenos Aires was always a migrant city, so people came, and you know all these books, Dos Sanders, Arrival City. I mean, in Buenos Aires, you can precisely study how it worked.
Okay.
And for sure that these people met looking for their families or somebody from your village or from your town. And all of a sudden they needed to have a space where to meet.
Yeah.
And in that sense also, these clubs are not something that is made from the top down. I mean, they start with a small room and then they build something else. Maybe they also move. So many of the clubs really moved also within the city of Buenos Aires, and they grew. And actually from my discipline as an architect and urbanist, it's amazing how you see that out of the social interaction, a social production of space becomes city. This is a thing that I urgently needed to investigate. And that was one of the good things that I had 6 years of doing, not just teaching, but also research in Buenos Aires.
And this is where you also mentioned the one thing that I think confirmed to listeners that you're not a social anthropologist or any other kind of social scientist, but you are an architect and an urbanist. And you're really interested in that aspect of city making as well as design. So how did you come to actually get interested in architecture and not what we think could have been social sciences or social anthropology?
Well, honestly speaking, let's say, I mean, I could give answer from 2 different time horizons. Why I was interested in architecture was actually I grew up in a suburban area of Munich where all the houses look the same.
Oh, a bit stale.
And this was something, honestly speaking, so that really, I was thinking there must be a different possibility. My family has a lot of craftsmen. And so for sure there was something about being interested in building, etc. And as being very good in mathematics, thinking, okay, I should become an engineer. Don't thinking in architecture, right? And actually by accident, I inscribed myself in architecture without having any idea what is the difference. Because I thought, okay, I mean, they're also doing houses. But the first year studying in TU Munich, I mean, it completely changed my mind. And in that sense, this is something of saying, okay, thanks to my really ugly village that I'm from, I became an architect. But on the other, and that brings me back to Buenos Aires. The first time being in Buenos Aires was in 2001. And already there was always working in the urban condition, an interdisciplinary team. So there were not just architects, there were also anthropologists and sociologists. And this was, for me, something that I said, okay, this is what I want to do.
I'm sensing a trend here. This podcast is over 20 episodes in now. And I remember back in the second episode, I told my guest that I also had the interest of possibly becoming an architect, but I can't draw to save my life. And so hence why I pursued engineering. So seems to be the common dilemma amongst all of us.
No, honestly speaking, as I wasn't bad in school. I was not bad in arts, but I was not an artist or something like that. And for sure, let's say the first 2 semesters in Munich, I mean, we had to draw a lot by hand.
But your drawings are crazy amazing.
No, but you should have seen my first drawings. They were ugly. They were really ugly.
Yeah, come on.
And honestly speaking, I think it was the 3rd or 4th week of the first semester. And we had these crazy architect stars being our professors. And they were always starting their lectures by showing the good results and the bad results.
Oh,
and you
no.
just remember, this was still with slides.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. And really in the 4th week, I already made it to the bad ones. But this professor said, well, how he draws the line is not that bad. So I give him 2 more years. So I survived.
And now you can draw things very easily. And it's crazy how you can then just take a pencil or pen or all the different utensils and just sketch out the ideas. I still wish I could do that. Maybe if I had taken a bit more patience with myself and time, who knows what the future would have held. But we're here now. And yeah, I guess as you mentioned, interdisciplinarity is key. And I myself also strive to, I guess, understand how we can connect the disciplines, especially with a lot of the challenges that we face now in today's world.
No, in fact, what we really try also understanding, and maybe this is also how we met somehow, that what we call in German Städtebau, which is not urban design.
But loosely translated, it's city building.
Yeah, literally.
Or city making.
It would be city making, maybe. Yeah. And here at the chair in Stuttgart, we really see this as a kind of interdisciplinary platform in order to invite different disciplines to join us. This started a little bit after working in TU Delft, coming to Vienna and starting my PhD project in Vienna, which I have to admit I still didn't finish my PhD.
Oh.
But I hope 2024 will be something. But there I was working in the Department of Urban Geography with Professor Heinz Fassmann, which is a very interesting research on migration. And he offered me the position as an architect, a PhD position. And that was really weird. Also amongst his colleagues, I mean, he asked him, why do you take an architect? And he said, well, I find interest in the way he thinks. And it gave me the possibility to understand much more about the social production of space.
Yeah.
And for many years, taking urban geography as this interdisciplinary platform that could invite. But now being back for many, many years in teaching in architecture and urban design, I feel really that Städtebau could be this place where everybody meets, or where we can give this invitation to join us and to talk about how spatial conditions are shaped and how with the knowledge of a lot of different disciplines, we can rethink these conditions of space.
No, definitely. And we've mentioned city making, the term itself, before on the show, back in episode 6. And yeah, it's also undergoing a serious transformation, I guess, where we're starting to resist traditional ways of planning. Listeners, you can check out episode 6 if you want. It's a nice, I think, complement to our discussion here as well, where I think we are bringing in new disciplines and we're starting to rethink of what it means to be planning and whether we should be approaching it from multiple angles, presenting it like a palette, call it that.
Yeah. No, I think this is, even if the faculty in Stuttgart, let's say our students are able to graduate in architecture and urban planning, we share a very strong critique on the way planning is also taught in Germany. And we think, let's say, we really need to rethink the discipline, especially because a lot of young students ask us to do. So they are interested in the urban condition, but they're not interested in the classical tools they were learning in planning. For sure, planning is a very, very complex discipline. And honestly speaking, I also doubt sometimes if I know all the tools, but I really feel there's a strong demand from a younger generation of saying, no, guys, let's do it the other way around. And this is also challenging in the teaching, but also now writing proposals for research, but also participating in urban design competitions.
Yeah.
If you understand your proposal as an incremental process of transformation on a long-term strategy. And in that sense, many classical planning tools don't work anymore.
I think a lot of the mindsets, and I see this also in the water space, that long-term thinking is sometimes very difficult to convince, because if you think about the sustainability lenses, that's one way of looking at it, but the economic aspects, as opposed to the environmental and social, seems to get a lot more attention. And people don't have enough, I guess, knowledge or the means to quantify the benefits in the long term of a sustainable development, a sustainable plan, bringing in more thoughtful, more circular, if we want to use the circular cities paradigm, more circular solutions that will help restore natural processes, which in a way has been recognized as one way of combating climate change. So that long-term thinking, I think, is still lacking in a lot of places. I think that's been partly driven also by governance arrangements where people come in, they leave after a few years, and the person taking over at the agency needs to get used to what happened before. That history or that story somehow gets lost. It somehow gets, I guess, a bit watered down in the process.
Well, yes, agreeing on your comment, but also seeing that maybe exactly due to all these challenges that we are facing, also some mayors, but also administration starts to change. They see, okay, this is what we did over the last 30 years. Doesn't work anymore.
There's definitely a sign of hope there.
And in that sense, with a lot of energy, also, let's say, giving our practice again more space and really engaging with cities that really want to change. And they don't want to have a kind of urban planning strategy about climate adaptations, etc., because they need, But there are cities who really see this as a possibility of really rethinking the way that we live together. And this gives me a lot of energy, honestly speaking, to really go this way. Even if there are a lot of new paths that we have to go, there's a lot of uncertainty. Also, again, working together with a lot of different people that share these doubts. But due to the collaboration, it just makes so much fun. And this is also something that, even if there are a lot of bad news, it gives me hope. And it gives me hope of meeting colleagues, meeting students, meeting people in the neighborhoods that we are working or that we are researching that really want to do something. And I think this is kind of hope.
There's definitely a glimmer of hope, and it's bright and burning. And I'm also looking forward to seeing how we progress in the coming years, because there is that willingness, and looking forward to, I guess, encountering new challenges and also facing the uncertainties head on. So you mentioned you've been at TU Munich. That's where you studied architecture and also drawing. And clearly you mastered that art, because then you did your PhD in Vienna. But also there are two other places that influenced you. We spoke about Buenos Aires, and you were in Buenos Aires at some point during your studies. And there was also TU Delft. How do they all hang together? What's the journey here?
Maybe it starts again of being very naive in studying architecture, thinking, okay, I will study 5-year career, and then I leave the faculty and I will build housing, mostly in Bavaria, because I'm from Munich.
That all don't look the same, right? You will make sure that they look all different.
Well, actually, this is what they taught me in Munich. Also with sharing workspace with very good students that became friends, and sometimes really, trusting more them than our professors. Now, it was at that time as Erasmus program actually really started. So Munich had 6 places, two to Prague, 2 to Madrid, and 2 to Delft. And I was working in a studio at the time in housing. They were a little bit a kind of Munich boy band, and it was fun to work with them. And then they said, Markus, you have to go. You need to leave TU Munich. You have to see something different in order to learn. So they asked me to apply in Copenhagen with Carsten Lorentzen, one of the former partners of Van Kunsten, crazy Danish, really left-wing architects.
Okay.
And so I made my portfolio applying there. And then for sure, let's say if you make one copy, you make a second one.
Yes,
so I applied for TU Delft, and I never thought that they will choose me, honestly speaking. But all of a sudden I got a call. Okay, well, you can go to TU Delft. And for sure, I knew about Rem Koolhaas, having some seminars, etc. But then all of a sudden you can go there. It was the end of the 1990s, so where all the super Dutch generation started, us, this MVRDV pavilion and for the expo in Hanover. So that was, wow, okay, I can go there. And Munich gave me really a very classical education, but there was a very good base, because I knew how to draw, I knew how to make details, I knew how construction works, I knew about materials, etc. And then you come to Delft and everything is possible. It was a faculty where on the ground floor, there was a huge library. There was a huge, what they call maquette hall, a huge workspace.
Wow.
Machines you just can't imagine. There was a TV studio. There was the photo laboratory. There were more than 100 computers at that time. So just imagine, how big my eyes got while entering TU Delft and thinking, okay, gosh. And this was great. And at that time, Delft was teaching in 5 modules a year. So it was always a 2-month course, 1 week break, and then again. So it was a kind of 5 sprints schedule a year. Tough schedule, but very, from the pedagogical way, very school-like. So, this is the module, this is the book. At the end of the module, you're there.
Okay.
But was a different way of studying in Munich. And I started very classical again, so don't daring the things, but I was interested in urban conditions. And then there was a module that was called U2, and there was working with this idea of the Homo Ludens and of New Babylon.
New Babylon and Homo Ludens.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was one of the last avant-gardes in the Netherlands in the 1960s. Johan Huizinga was writing about the Homo Ludens in comparison to the Homo Faber. And Constant Nieuwenhuis was an artist that created this utopian thought of New Babylon, which was a kind of city on top of the city.
Okay.
And I applied there. And they was just a place for 32 students. And I also said, okay, they won't take me because I'm an international student, etc. And then they took me. And in that sense, what I really learned is you should, let's say, doubt on yourself, but you should also dare to do something. And meeting there, really super interesting international local students. And one day a guy came and said, oh, next module, there is a trip to Costa Rica. And then we said, well, okay, guys, great. We should apply because we were a group of 8. And so we should apply. And also there, they chose us and we went with 70 students from TU Delft to Central America. One group stayed in Costa Rica. We continued to go to El Salvador and made actually a regional planning strategy, a huge development corridor from the airport towards the center.
Oh, wow.
And
Massive.
it was at that time, a couple of years ago, there was still the civil war in El Salvador. So it was a very tough condition. But then most of us, we said, okay, what actually are we doing in architecture? Shouldn't we do something completely different? And that made out of this group of 8, having this interest, okay, we should really do our diploma thesis projects on large metropolitan areas. And again, using the capacity of TU Delft at the time was the year 2000, and that they had a lot of international relations. So we really went to the international office, asked for all the addresses of the Latin American context, and we wrote to them saying, okay, we are a group of 8, and we want to do a project.
As you do. Take the initiative. Why not?
And then actually the first that answered was Buenos Aires. And that brought us then in the end to Buenos Aires out of these 8, because of some students need to return to their home universities, other changed to TU Delft and lost a little bit of time. And so in the end, we were just 2 who took the plane in May 2001 to Buenos Aires in order to start the diploma project.
Fascinating.
Without knowing any word of Spanish.
Oh, no. I thought you had known Spanish by then.
And in that sense, the European planes arrive always in the morning. And this first flight was like really in the morning, 6 o'clock, Buenos Aires. And there was a sea of light that didn't stop. And just me as a guy, being from Munich, 1.3 million inhabitants, seeing this, I said, oh my God, I don't survive there. Yeah. And I was asking this friend that joined me, Paul, guy, we go to the city, look at it, and then we return to the airport. So I didn't imagine myself being able to live a life there, because not knowing Spanish, etc. But all of a sudden, and this is also what you told in the beginning, this city gives you a lot of energy. And it was also very interesting to me. In the beginning, it looks like you are in a European city. Yeah, you could feel like, okay, there's a part of Paris, there's a part of Vienna. The city makes it easy for you to read a certain pattern. And this is also, I think, why Buenos Aires is so famous for European travelers as a starting point. But then, as said, you get to know the city and all of a sudden you feel like, okay, this is an amazing overlay of a lot of different cultures, rooted on the Argentinian territory, rooted in the territory of the Rio de la Plata, which is the River Plate, that also brings the water even from Sao Paulo to the Atlantic. So you see the river basin that this river has, and Buenos Aires is built on this river basin. And this relation, having a lot of cultures, having this territory, this is something worthwhile to study.
Fascinating journey, but a case where a culture shock really opens your mind as a result of that and shaped some projects that have defined your career to date. And a lot of this is really centered around much of the discussion we've had so far, society, and this idea that globalization, our societies and cities are growing, they're getting more complex cultures. A lot of cities are very multicultural societies, but with it and a lot of the key events we've also had and experienced in the past few years with the pandemic, this has also led to a lot of changes in urban life, more segregation in a way, or angst between different social groups or even just family units. And this is something that, in a way, you've seen in Buenos Aires, they do really well with the way these Clubes de Barrio work. But in general, it's been a key topic that you've been wanting to address in a lot of the design work that you've done.
Yeah, but what is very interesting that the project that we did in El Salvador was with a chair that was called Globalization, Urban Form and Governance. It was the chair of Jürgen Rosemann and a lot of amazing professors, Marisa Carmona, Diego Sepúlveda. And I think with this understanding how also governance is a very important issue while talking about the urban condition, this broadened a little bit my perspective as an also practicing architect that is interested in the making. And in that sense, from 2006 on, I was invited every year to go with students from TU Delft for 3 weeks to run a workshop in Buenos Aires. And exactly what you described, on the one, we have this social network of the Clubes de Barrio, but on the other, what you can study in the Latin American city is how a high percentage of segregation leads to an urban fragmentation. Segregated parts of the city, this is how city constitutes. Yeah, you always live with the one that are a little bit more similar to you. So segregation is not the challenge, but a high percentage grade of segregation, then the problem starts. And then even if this segregation is manifested in the urban fabric, this is then what we call the fragmentation, then what should you do? Right?
And planning doesn't seem to help that. Traditional zoning in land uses already, in a way, segregate the land because we try to assign a single use. And we're trying to address that now with these, I guess in Barcelona, they use super blocks to try and bring in different uses and communities together. And, we try to just have in high density planning multiple uses for the space. And whether we stack the spaces on top of each other in high-rise buildings or whether we just create flexible spaces. This is something that now we've come to realize that the planning is not exactly helping.
In that sense, let's say if planning is abused, and in that sense, I remember a very interesting workshop. Actually, I was always in charge of helping the students coming from Delft with a lot of theoretical background. So they read a lot of books, but then confronting them with the reality. And actually, this was also a certain critique most of the Buenos Aires colleagues gave to me. Markus, you're bringing them to this neighborhood or to that one, but this is dangerous, etc. No, it was dangerous for them because they didn't know. And this is also, let's say, what I always felt, especially then during the last 6 years in Buenos Aires, that working with marginalization, working with the informal is, it's a certain fashion. And then there's a lot of conferences all over the world. But honestly speaking, there is just little work done in the territory. And these people who work in the territory, actually, these are not the ones that really fly to the conferences, wherever you might have them, either in Europe or in the States. So this was something very interesting of seeing how the local professors really got nervous if we were in some neighborhoods that were not informal ones. They were classical neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, having these clubs, etc. But as they are from a different class, they don't go to these neighborhoods. And I think this is also then where urban fragmentation then also starts to disrupt your local map. And this is what I really felt, not with all, but with some of the professors in Buenos Aires that they talk about, but actually they never went to these spaces. And when they went, actually they were so nervous because there is a different, let's say, level of class that makes it difficult for them. For my diploma thesis, it took me nearly half a year in order to have an entry to these neighborhoods.
Wow, that's a lot of preparation.
And that means you ask an anthropologist, can I join you? Then you go to a local meeting, people start to get to know you, etc. So you have to create trust. And this is one of the most important issues. If you work in the territory, there needs to be trust. And I always refer to that because I love it. There was the starting point of the homepage of the Berlin-based Raumlabor, and they had an image saying, no trust, no city. And this also is something that is now really became base of my argumentation. We have to create trust. And then it's amazing how you can work.
Very powerful statement. And I guess that is maybe the best way to explain what we're facing today. There is a sense of increasing distrust. It's becoming harder to build trust within society, even just between governments and society themselves, because people get burnt quite easily by one single mistake that the government can make. And we're seeing examples of this all around the world. We don't have to go into that in detail. But that, in a sense, can only be built, I guess, and we see this through your work, if we can create the opportunities to build that trust. And this is where you have projects that I think really define that kind of element, where you really touch upon creating a space for that. Similar to the Clubes de Barrio, but I guess applying that in a more broader sense. So lots of issues that you saw, that you got to experience, opened your eyes from visiting Buenos Aires, having that exchange in TU Delft, from studying architecture at TU Munich. So you've moved quite a lot around and then went to do your PhD in Vienna after that, which you said you're going to finish. So looking forward to attending any Viva or any exhibition that you're going to put up. So do let me know. But I guess your connection to Buenos Aires is also, in a way, embedded in a chair that you applied for, the Gropius Chair, which actually quite interesting how this name came about, because Walter Gropius is founder of the Bauhaus movement, which is quite different to what we sort of picture as the sustainable city and the sustainable society. It's quite dramatic, actually, but I digress. So that was, in a way, the chair you applied for, which you got in 2016, which then allows you to continue the work in Buenos Aires.
Yeah. In fact, I would love to deepen also this discussion about Gropius, because I still have a strong critique, and was one of the first things that I wanted to do is changing the name of the chair.
Do enlighten me about that, yes.
But that might come later as an argument. Now, honestly speaking, I traveled a lot. It was never a plan of doing so. It just happened. And I think this is the lovely thing, that somehow all these positions also came. And 2016 was teaching in the Department of Urbanism in the chair of Martina Baum. And one day, and I was always referring to Buenos Aires and all these things that we did with the TU Delft colleagues. And one day, a young colleague, she was looking for scholarships. She wrote me an email saying, Markus, there is a call for the Walter Gropius chair. This chair was established in 2001, as I was at that time doing my diploma thesis project in Buenos Aires. So I knew the first professor, Max Velchguera, which recently retired from the Bauhaus University in Weimar. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try. But as said, I didn't have a finished PhD, which was requisite. But I said, okay, I have a lot of experience. So I applied. They invited me to Bonn because this is a DAAD-funded chair. The DAAD is what would be called the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst, the German Academic Exchange Service, which most is based on scholarships because of language. And they have a strong program, but also student scholarships. And they have a couple of chairs. And one of them is the Walter Gropius chair. So I applied. They put me on the shortlist then after this presentation. And then the local university in Buenos Aires chose me because of saying, okay, this is not a researcher, this is a practicing architect that knows how to design. So this brought me back to Buenos Aires and giving me the possibility, having this chair, of really deepen certain curiosities, certain lack of, let's say, knowledge that I still had. Because for sure, it's one thing to travel each year 3 weeks to Buenos Aires, or to have a constant life in a neighborhood, being member of a club, going to the neighborhood clubs every day. And this made then a different way of collaboration also possible. And in that sense, as my antecessor, he was Joaquin Medina Warburg, which is now professor in KIT in Karlsruhe. He created a Latin American research network. And I said, well, I'm not a researcher, I'm a teacher in architecture. So what I will create is a network between the universities, so that we have a lot of students exchange and start also, let's say, with the exchange of students, creating this awareness. So amongst these years, we did a lot of joint studios, not just with the University of Stuttgart, but also having guests from TU Dresden, from Braunschweig University, from Hamburg University, from TU Berlin. So a lot of different people came, and we always tried to create workshops, joint studios in order to tackle certain issues. And then there's another foundation, which is called Sto Foundation. Sto is a strong firm in the building industries. And they have a line of scholarships in design-build projects. And during all these years of being together with TU Delft, seeing what is going to happen, seeing also that some Buenos Aires colleagues started to do one-to-one projects, I had a very strong critique on those, saying, do they really help their neighborhoods? Or is it not just for us as architects of saying, okay, we did one-to-one projects? And so we applied with Sto Foundation, and we received not just money from Sto Foundation, but also an additional scholarship from the ARD for what they call a summer school. So professors from Germany were able to travel to Buenos Aires, and we started to make up a huge team. Nevertheless, and there was another issue in Stuttgart University, we have a platform. This is called 1:1, one-to-one, that also shares this critique on just doing the design build because of the design build, but always having a social engagement. And in that sense, I asked these colleagues from this platform also to join me. And by meeting local professors in Buenos Aires, they were fascinated by this platform one-to-one and said, actually, this is what we need. We need also to have a kind of horizontal platform where all the chairs can apply in order to do one-to-one projects in the neighborhoods. But as said, it actually takes a lot of time to create trust.
That is true. And this was in 2016.
16, as I started the chair. The application was in 2018. And the summer school we run in 2019.
So it's been like more than 15 years since your first trip to Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
How's your Spanish by then?
Actually, my Spanish got much better, but it's not a
It
Spanish.
helps.
It's really a porteño. So I'm really speaking the local dialect.
Okay.
So I have friends in Madrid. They always laugh about me because they say you are Argentinian. But it was really interesting because during these last years in the chair, I really also started to write. But I had never a Spanish course. So I knew how to read. But this was actually the big learning in Spanish was how to write. Being on the street, talking or giving lectures, that was not really the issue. For sure, let's say it was a Spanish from the street, so it was not an academic one. But it really helped me to gain this trust. And for the project that I would love to share also with the people that listen to the podcast is a neighborhood where it was not that easy to enter. And I really thought, okay, we need a lot of time.
And this is the Biblioteca La Carcova. Was that a good accent?
That was nearly perfect. Yeah. So next time you can travel with me to the neighborhood there as well.
I'd love to. Do let me know. I'll come with.
Honestly speaking, you should because of your expertise. And this is in a river delta of a small river aside of Rio de la Plata. There are a lot of water challenges. So you should travel with me in order to create let's say, another urban strategy.
Yeah, do let me know.
There was a local university, which is also a national one, the UNSAM, Universidad Nacional de San Martín. San Martín has 600,000 inhabitants and is part of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. And it's based in the river delta of the Reconquista River, which is one of the most polluted rivers in Latin America. It's completely aside of the biggest waste dump of Buenos Aires. And where all the informal settlements, and there are quite a lot there, people live in from the waste dump.
Wow.
So there are, and maybe some of the people listening to the podcast will know, there's this very famous cartonero in Buenos Aires. So people who come from the metropolitan area travel by train to the center and they are looking for cardboard and collect the cardboard in order to resell. So this was really famous after the 2001 crisis. There were also these so-called white trains where the train company took out the seats so that people really could move with their carriage onto the train. And there's another one, which is what they call the ciruja, a surgeon. Yeah? And the ciruja is that you are on the waste dump and you look for something that you can pick in order to recycle or to repair or something else. So they are called the Republic of the Cirujas, of the surgeons.
Okay.
So another really big challenge, and a couple of these informal settlements are built on waste dump.
That essentially is the canvas that you began with.
And this is something where I said, okay, this is too much. But it was proposed by the dean of the UNSAM faculty because the UNSAM is a university that is based in the territory. Mm-hmm. And this is very important for them.
Okay.
So really working for and with the territory. They also have primary schools, technical schools, etc. So in that sense, they're really engaged. And this was, let's say, a first trust of saying, okay, we have a strong partner that knows about the territory, but for sure it's an official institution. So what are the key agents in one of the neighborhoods?
Yep.
And one of them was Waldemar Kubischa. And Waldemar is a guy that was 10 years in prison. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, also not, let's say, officially not something that you would start to have a contact with.
Yeah, you'd probably think, okay, why?
And actually it was quite hard what he did as a teenager. Yeah. He was sent to prison, but he came out of a family that was reading books. Uh-huh. So when his family came to the prison to visit him, they gave him books and not something to eat. Yeah. So this guy, Waldemar, was all of a sudden known in the prison as somebody that reads books. And then he became more and more books in his cell. He says, well, guys, I don't have a place to sleep, so we need a space for the books. So he asked for creating a library.
In prison?
In the prison.
Wow.
And because, he was a nice guy, so the police allowed him to open a library. Yeah. And he also became the first librarian of the prison. And I will refer to that during the story, on the project that we are doing, there's one very, very strong sentence. A book means freedom.
Interesting.
And not just in a literal sense, but also for Waldemar, because he could leave his cell
to manage the library.
So in that sense, it was also a physical condition that is in this sentence. A book means freedom.
This is fascinating to listen to. I don't even want to get ahead of it, but I can start to see links coming in to really designing spaces for people and how this, maybe even by pure accident, because his cell was flooding with books, but that library, I suppose, started to play a very important role, especially for the other prisoners as well.
Exactly. So in that sense, the library became a place of encounter. Because for sure, let's say if you're in prison, for sure you do your sports, etc. But I mean, culture or education didn't play a role. But on the other, there is a law in Argentina that allows everybody to study. So in that sense, Waldemar and 5 other people claimed the right to study and said,
Interesting.
guys, we have the right, so let's do something. And in that sense, they wanted to study, for sure, they wanted to study law, but the UNSAM University didn't have a career on law.
Yeah.
What they had was a career on sociology. So the 5 guys plus Waldemar, they said, okay, let's study sociology.
From prison?
In the prison.
Okay.
Yeah. So they, aside of the library, they also created a university center in the prison where you were able to study sociology. So Waldemar received his grade. He's now even writing his PhD in the UNSAM University. He's a teacher there and a researcher. So very interesting to say how this way also changed his life. But as he left the prison, he said, okay, my neighborhood is a really hard one. And there are even popular songs that say Maradona, now I have to say was, buying his cocaine in the Carcova. So this was how people in the whole metropolitan area of Buenos Aires saw the Carcova neighborhood. So this is traffic full.
Yeah.
So, and he said, okay, what I did in a prison, I now do with my neighborhood. I will create a library that allows the people to have a different way of life. Not in that way that we then would say, for sure, and I was always arguing, okay, this is now what you claim is the right to the city.
Yeah.
But what he, first of all, wanted was a place of encounter, a place where you can leave your home, leave the dense, and not just the densely built, but also socially very dense.
And in a way isolated as well.
And especially for young women, isolated places. Yeah, it's a very good point that you mentioned. And he started using pallets, creating a 3 by 3 by 3 meter space.
Okay, just simple wooden pallets.
Simple wooden pallets.
Stacking it up.
Yeah? And he was using a territory, which was a territory of an industry. This industry wanted to keep open as a kind of open barrier between the industry and the informal neighborhood. But as he was building it, the people already saw, now how Waldemar is going to build his house. And it took also, let's say, a long time that it is not his house. His family was living in the neighborhood. But he said, no, I mean, this is now a first space of encounter. Yeah. And out of that, more and more trust, more and more people joined. They really started to make a house.
Fascinating.
With bricks, with a roof. But for sure, what they did, they were creating the house that they thought, okay, this is what we can build.
A sense of ownership and stewardship started to grow in these people when they saw what Waldemar was doing.
Exactly. And in that sense, it was also very interesting because all of a sudden, he was also invited to join. I'm not sure if it was a political party or if it was some NGO to travel to the Pope to Rome.
Oh, okay.
And this then made him completely famous. Because he was then in Rome as a guy that was in prison, a guy that comes from an informal settlement, and that also brought a statue from the Gauchito jail, which is the Argentinian Robin Hood.
Okay.
And this Gauchito jail plays the same role as the Catholic Church. Yeah, so it's very, very important. So people are Catholic, but they also, they really trust in Gauchito jail. So every neighborhood has also a small chapel of Gauchito jail. And this, aside of the library, helped him to create the spatial condition. Because where Gauchito jail is, there is no waste.
Aha. So in a way, relating something or symbol that people sort of worship or respect or highly revere with the efforts to then ensure the space itself is maintained.
Exactly.
It's kept neat, it's kept clean.
And so in that sense, it was not just the library, but it was also this small statue on a couple of bricks that actually prepared the space.
Yeah.
One has to say
Interesting. Yeah. I guess that would create the opportunity without people knowing it because you're using something that they can relate to. And then they start to see all of a sudden the benefits, the other benefits associated with that.
And this was really interesting because Waldemar and also his wife, Gisela Perez, they are really, I mean, they're so smart because they really think not just in the everyday, but they think also, let's say, I mean, how can we create different conditions? And without these two and a group of nearly 30 other people who are taking care of the library, taking care of the kids, etc. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. So this was the story before. So this is when I entered the project.
Enter Markus, now armed with Spanish. Or how do you call the dialect again?
Porteño.
Armed with Porteño.
I knew the story. I was very happy that this should be our partner. But then I need also to create this trust with Waldemar. And I really said to myself and also to my professor colleagues in Buenos Aires, we need to start the project much earlier in order that we can work with the students, etc. But really, we met, and for the first day, it was like this. There was already in the beginning, from Waldemar's side, so much trust to me, but also to my colleagues, Lucas Celardi, Roberto Busnelli, Gustavo Digues. I tell you, this was really amazing.
It's lovely when things just work from the get-go.
And we didn't think of, but then this even gave us more energy to prepare everything. So in that sense, this project with the summer school started in spring 2019, where students from Stuttgart, from the big architectural faculty from the University of Buenos Aires, from the UNSAM University, from students from Rosario and Cordoba. So altogether 120 students met in this library, which was too little in order to feed all the students. And the point was, Waldemar was asking actually we need more space.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only thing that he asked. But then we said, okay, we have 120 students. So let's just check, what would we really imagine? So we gave the students a lot of freedom. So every school was developing in a different way. And then we said, in the end of the semester, we need to deal with 120. So we agreed on that. The professors will select a couple of projects that are worth to develop further. And then we will meet Waldemar, Gisela, and the whole team in order to discuss with them. So we did. And that was the most interesting moment, because in July in Argentina is winter.
Yep.
Yeah. And we met for the jury, and nobody was thinking the way the people from the library, from the Biblioteca Popular, were thinking. Because they said, no, actually, we love all the proposals, but what we need is actually shadow. Because if the kids play and the sun is really hot, they will not come to play. So what we need is we need shadow. Didn't we think of an extension of a library? And then all of a sudden, so we said, okay, we sort the projects out. And then we finally selected a project by Stuttgart students, Annika Sieblitz and Christina Estanislao, who created this idea of the Parque Educativo, the educative park, of saying it's not a project that is done by one. So there are a couple of different projects that will create a public space, that will create a park, something that these people don't have. Yeah. Just imagine talking in an informal neighborhood of creating a park.
Piecemeal design, little elements, comes together as an emergent result. And that is a park itself.
So in that sense, this was, let's say, the urban strategy of saying, okay, there could be also then an extension of the library. There could be, let's say, an inclusion of the football field, which is a site. There could be also a new chapel for the local saint, for Gauchito Gil. And they had also a small roof. And again, as an urban design strategy, that doesn't mean everything has to be designed as they were thinking of. But they gave us the key of saying, okay, how can we implement a couple of small projects? Because also Gisela and many young women saying, we need actually to have a kindergarten. Yeah?
Based on needs.
Based on the needs.
Prioritizing the individual projects of a largest plan.
So in that sense, that was the strategy. Then we also found very nice projects on the extension of the library. And then there was a couple of students who were really trying to formulate a square, a spatial condition of a public space.
Okay.
Because for sure, the site is still private land.
Yep.
A side of it is completely informal. But they said, no, they need a place to meet. So, and they created what they called techo sombrilla, a roof that gives shadow.
There's your shadow.
And this was the project everybody loved.
And it got, I guess, the community much more involved in the process, right?
And in that sense, it was really amazing. So they had also nice models. For sure, architecture students making nice models. So Waldemar and Gisela and the team said, now let's go for this one. We still had a little bit of money from the Sto Foundation. And said, okay, we give it a try. We start to build.
Yeah.
Based on the decision of the group, based also on talks that we had with the neighborhood. So we started. But we didn't have much money left. But okay, it was enough money to buy wood.
Okay.
So we went, the professors and Waldemar, we went to the local wood company and we had 3,000 euros.
Yep, that's certainly not a lot, but you could still get something with it.
Worked, yeah. So we bought, and then I was bringing the money in cash. So he saw all this Argentinian peso, which were at that time, they had more value than today. And he was, let's say, I mean, he really got white.
Really?
Yeah? But okay, the professors, we were completely convinced that this is the way we should do it. 2 years later, I mean, there was then the pandemic, so many other things to tell actually about the Biblioteca. But 2 years later, we were able to finish the roof already with another funding from a German NGO, which is a secondary school. And we were sitting underneath the umbrella, talking about the social production of space and about the necessity of architects. Because we were talking about, okay, how to continue. And then also many neighbors said, okay, why do we need the architects? And then Waldemar tells me one story. He said the day that we were buying the wood, which is a very strong wood because it needs to be resistant for the heat, for the rain, etc. Yeah. We were spending a lot of money. And he was really feeling bad that day because the library didn't have any toilet. There were not any sanitary facilities. And he was, let's say, thinking, why do we spend 3,000 euro on a material that could be also cheaper? Yeah, because we could have got for pine or whatsoever. And 2 years later, you see what does it mean to have a trust also in the architect. Because now there's a very stable, very robust construction that gives shadow, that allows the people and the kids to play in the shadow, that allows for cultural events, for concerts, etc. And in that sense, he said, okay, I could have said that they know, but as there's a trust, a professional trust between, and he then called us my architects and us, and he was really happy. But honestly speaking, really, he had this fear as we were buying the material that this is a wrong decision.
That maybe you should have spent it on, I guess, facilities for the basic human needs.
And this is then what happened also during the pandemic. I was here in Stuttgart, but knowing, okay, that this would be the only site that organizes something like the Clubes de Barrio, but we already had a contact with an NGO, which is called Aktion Palka, from the Saar area, which is close to Luxembourg. Yep. So the former mining region of Germany, or one of them. And they were already partner of saying, we are since 50 years dedicated to education, and we've always financed projects in either Africa or in Latin America. And they really gave us an immense amount of money. So during the pandemics already, we could start to renovate the ground floor of the library with sketches from here, but also sketches from the Buenos Aires professors, because they were also not allowed to go there. And this is also something that we should talk about, because officially Argentina has 2,000 municipalities, but there are more than 4,000 informal settlements.
Yeah, that's a very big contrast.
And there is a lot of knowledge. So there is also in this neighborhood, there is an electrician, but it's not an official one. For sure, there is also a carpenter, but this is not a licensed carpenter. But this is local knowledge. And this is very, very important to take advantage out of this local knowledge. Also then in all the other constructions that we made, always working not just with the students, but also working with local people and using their everyday experience, but also on the other side, confronting them sometimes with other thoughts.
And new challenges.
And this collaboration was amazing. So they really renovated, just really with the money that we were able to send and the sketches that we delivered, they really managed to renovate in an amazing way. For sure, as a classical architect, some details would be different.
Of course.
And for sure, let's say some photos you wouldn't take because they wouldn't fit into a classic architecture magazine. But this is not what we are talking about. What we are talking about is how a social condition created now a spatial result. And this spatial result as a space becomes now a place because it's inhabited. People are there every day. And especially, and this is what I said before, mentioning Gisela Perez, this is a space where young women can come and just breathe and just do what they want. They're just relaxed there. And this is, to a certain point, a realm. Because, as you also mentioned before, there is such a dense environment in an informal settlement, so that this is really an oasis. But aside of being an oasis, it's also the space where people can learn. Yep. There are people who really now making the school degree for the primary school. They learn to write.
Amazing.
So also here, let's say, it's not a classical library. the book, again, to a certain point, is an excuse for creating a space of knowledge production and knowledge sharing and interchange. And then there were other departments of UNSAM involved of saying, okay, how can we continue creating out of this trust also a certain economy? So there were workshops on how to create associations, how to really finance business ideas, etc. Out of these workshops, they were creating 3 collectives. And these 3 collectives, they are on the one in construction side, other, which is amazing by now, they're producing public furniture out of plastic dump waste. Wow. With an initial financing by the former state government. And in the beginning, I was very critical because for sure, let's say, we in Europe, plastic, no, not at all. But over there, there's...
Everything's a resource, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything, first of all, is a resource. And second, there's still a production, or let's say, the waste of more than 1 million bottles of plastic every day. Yeah. So it's a material. And if this collective can work with this material, I think it's kind of amazing. So in that sense, out of this first idea of collaborating, it's not just a friendship. Yeah. It's not just a professional collaboration. It's now recently, my colleagues were building the structure for the extension of the library. In the meantime, there is a kindergarten, which was partly financed by the national state, but then done by the local craftsmen, so to say. There is, in the meantime, also now a new chapel for the Gauchito jail. And in that sense, we are really filling this idea of the Parque Educativo with content, but not as a one big project.
But it's a living and growing thing.
It's a living and growing thing.
Organized by its own society.
And this is, to me, always being there. It is so nice. Because there are also kids that were 2019 kids meeting our students. They know now what a university is.
Wow.
And they were visiting the UNSAM University. So they know, there is also a way where I can have a different profession. There are young men who were, not telling it in a naive way, but many of them for sure are in the drug traffic, etc. Yeah. But helping us, they are able to receive a certificate. So they received a university certificate saying, okay, this guy was doing 200 hours construction work. With this paper, they are proud, returning home and saying, this is what I did.
Because in a way, the experience matters. Yeah. And it's what shapes your skills, your tools.
And the last thing, what was then really, there I really needed to cry, was that people now seeing this roof that gives the shadow. They call it, this is our Obelisco. This is our obelisk, which is the sign of Buenos Aires.
The very first item you made sure you could build. It stood the test of elements and time, and it's now become a symbol.
And it's now a symbol. So it's not just used. So it's really the symbol. And in that sense, I think all the students, but also we as professors, the professors here in Stuttgart, Martina Baum, Markus Allmann, Kyra Bullard, Spila Setzen, but also the professors in Buenos Aires, mentioning before Gustavo, Lucas, Roberto, we learned. And also we learned how to maybe also to a certain extent reformulate our way of teaching and thinking architecture as something completely different, not as an artifact, but much more as a social design.
As a collective effort.
Exactly, that has the capacity to transform spatial conditions with the means of architecture. So in that sense, architecture is not the built result, but it's a way of thinking complex conditions in space. Really, this transformed also our approach in teaching design studio or in the way we offer seminars, etc.
And it's lovely to see how just even one project can have that big an impact. And it is the project that you are most known for. And I think you've received awards for it as well. And it's in a way come along with on your own journey. And it's still thriving. I guess the question begs to ask, what's next for this Parque Educativo?
Well, in fact, let's say it's all of us that received these prizes. As you also received the prize for the teaching project in the Ibero-American Biennial of Architecture, it was not us, so it was also the team of the library that receives the prize.
The entire collective,
essentially. The collective, right? And again, here we talk about maybe also authorship of projects. I think something that is now really discussed in the discipline. Who's the author? Is it the classical architect
that signs on the plans?
Sign the plan, is it, or is it not much more behind? And I think also here a younger generation of becoming architects or also rethink this process. So what does it mean to have the right of something? No, I tell you, in the end, the Parque Educativo at the moment, maybe 300 authors.
Wow.
So 300 different people with all the different projects, helping, assisting. For sure, there are sketches. For sure, there is a technical plan. But also in that sense, very interesting. In the beginning of the first project of this huge sun umbrella, I thought, okay, Gustavo, Lucas, Roberto, we need to detail it because then we know exactly what kind of nails, etc. we need. Then we said, no, Marcus, we need to see what is there.
Yep.
So what is there on the market, what is available, this is what we bought. And out of that, we developed the detail. Also in that sense, this idea of incremental design and also not thinking, okay, I want to have this precise detail as I learned it in TU Munich, but rather thinking, okay, what can local people produce so that I don't need to import, but what can I do with the local knowledge? And I think this was also a strong learning process to me.
I guess if you take your time to learn about the society and you take your time to, I guess, experience the cultures, then you start to uncover a lot of hidden treasures and skills that you never thought existed. Yeah. And that often makes for a better design in the end.
And one of the books that I'm still thinking together with Waldemar is about talking about creating knowledge and having this respect for local knowledge because these people know so much.
Yeah. The experience, the tacit knowledge, the cultural background, and just knowing the land at its most fundamental level.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is something that is really aside of maybe handing in the PhD, but writing this book about, you call it tacit knowledge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about this, how knowledge is produced and how we can make use of it. Aside of the Parque Educativo, there was also over the last 6 years a collaboration on reformulating of informal settlement in the center of Buenos Aires, which is called the Villa 20, the City 20. Yeah. And in that sense, working with more, let's say, stable stakeholders, but also in a very interesting process of participation. Yeah. But they're using also much more my European knowledge on urban transformation processes, accessibility, connectivity, so these terms. Yeah. Because these were also during the TU Delft time, key issues of counteracting to fragmentation. And I think the two projects, the Villa 20 as well as the Parque Educativo, they keep a certain balance. Yeah. Because the Villa 20, it was really much more about convincing other stakeholders of going certain ways of transforming. Okay. Whereas being in the territory, in the Parque Educativo, both are very, very interesting and depending on one another.
And so you'll be embarking on the Villa 20, or you've been doing that?
Yeah. I mean, for sure, let's say nobody knows what's going to happen now with the new government. But as the internal part that was really amazingly reshaped by the local agents, but now let's say creating exactly this connection towards the urban fabric. So if this would be the next step, this would be a project to come back to Buenos Aires.
And I look forward to seeing when that next trip is and if I can join at some point. Also, if you do plan to write that book or to compile a lot of that knowledge, do let me know. I'd be very interested in being one of the first to read it.
Yeah, and in fact, let's say because we share also a certain common ground, I think it could be nice also to ask us during the writing some, let's say, statements or reflections.
No, definitely. And I look forward to embarking on some collaborations. We've already had one behind us, a big one, but that we'll have to save for reflection in another follow-up episode, definitely. Markus, this has been fascinating just hearing the story of the Parque Educativo and just your passion for Buenos Aires and that experience of going from one environment and developing your skills only to realize that we have to separate the classical from, I guess, the new, call it new world or maybe new thought and the transition we need to make to deal with the challenges that our world faces. But like I do with every guest, I'd love to ask you a few key questions so that listeners can get to know a lot more about you. One of the questions that really you can feel as you're really telling the story and really the need to help build spaces for society. But you wake up in the morning, what is that key inspiration that keeps you going to do what you do? And to keep on changing or challenging the way, the traditional architecture and urbanistic thinking thinks?
Honestly speaking, I think it's the students. This is so motivating to be allowed to teach. I frame it that way. It's not a burden. It's actually one of the best issues that could have happened to me. Also by accident becoming a teacher in architecture and in urban design or urban transformation. And this gives everyday motivation. And that there are a lot of people who really also want to have this change. I think this sleeping elephant is waking up and I think we are a lot already. And this gives a lot of energy and motivation.
Do you think we have reached critical mass yet?
Yes.
I'm looking forward to just taking on the world with new ideas. Is there a key moment, book, or person that completely changed the course of your career or mindset? I mean, you've told the story of Valdemar and also of your professors, but any other moments that might have completely changed your thinking?
Maybe also coming back to where I grew up, there was a competition on a production area south of Freising, which is a city north of Munich, that was won by Hermann Herzberger in 1993. And it was weird because he was designing just a roof. Yeah. And out of that, then studying architecture, all of a sudden there was an exhibition by Hermann Herzberger. And it was 1995. And they published his book, Lessons for Students in Architecture, in German, which is, the German translation is Vom Bauen.
Okay.
And then being in Delft, Hermann Herzberger is still teaching, but I was not allowed to take his courses because I didn't speak Dutch so good. It was an architectural theory class. But it was his last speech in the faculty, and he was so motivating, and he was saying, guys, what is our profession? It's giving space. This is crazy, right?
To put it very simply, yeah.
Yeah, and in that sense, I would say if there was a person that really, up till now, even recently this year, we had the possibility to visit Hermann Herzberger, now 91-year-old.
Wow.
Together with the team of Architecture in his studio in Amsterdam. This guy is amazing. He's still 3 days a week in the studio. He has still a curiosity. He's still engaged. He knows what is about politics and society. And if me with 91, if I would have this energy, I would be more than happy. So maybe it's Hermann Herzberger that to a certain point changed my way, how I look at architecture, and also the way we need to see architecture as said, as a way of thinking and not as a final product.
As a vehicle towards creating change for the better.
Yeah.
And so if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about some of the challenges you face overnight with the wave of this wand, what would that be?
At the moment, actually, I would just wish peace.
Yeah, everything's too complicated.
And I think at the moment, really, you're just concerned by seeing all these bad news worldwide. You don't understand. You see also, let's say, how also in the German society, there's a huge rupture. You see it in the Argentinian one. And I think we need to return to have respect from one to the other.
And trust.
And trust. And this would be my wish. Respect and trust the other.
Because as you've shown through the example, trust can create some amazing results.
Yeah.
And bring together, as you said, how many authors? 300, essentially 300 people really committed to this one big emergent site.
Yeah. And out of this 300, let's say a couple of thousand profiting of it. And maybe also then they will become authors in the next step of the projects. Yeah. Now, really, Peter, I'm quite concerned us seeing classical developments in our discipline. Let's say if you have projects running, there's still about everything has to be made by a contract. So there's a lot of distrust between municipalities, investors, society. This is not for the good.
No. And bureaucracy doesn't make it any easier.
Exactly.
We need a revision of planning and design and just generally how we deal with or how we shape the cities. Well, let's hope with 2024, a lot of this will start to change and we start to see, I guess, more positive things coming to light, especially if there's a lot of will to create some change and to actually make some progress in society, in fighting climate change, as well as, creating vibrant environments for both humans and also for nature. What was one of the most challenging situations that you have ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
Actually, I was thinking a lot about it. But maybe, and also because we were talking so much about Argentina, it was the first day I was able to enter the informal neighborhood for my diploma thesis, which was the Villa 21-24, so town 21-24. And the guy that took me into the neighborhood was one of the most important drug dealers of Buenos Aires. And I was on the back of his motorcycle and going into the neighborhood. And I was really asking myself, this guy, you shake his hand and you knew that maybe there was just 1 hour before he used this hand and having a gun. Yeah. And the question was for me, okay, should I collaborate with a person like this? But on the other, knowing exactly without this person, I would not be able to.
So it was really a moral dilemma.
A moral dilemma.
Wow.
But on the other, for sure, there was the diploma thesis, but been still also in contact with this neighborhood, that for sure this guy thought, okay, if I allow some architects to enter, I will also make a deal. And this deal was for sure that if parts of these informal settlements become legal, parts of his family will have a bigger lot than others. And also this is a dilemma that you have to face working in these conditions, because there is always power.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you deal with it? But for me, as a graduating student in architecture, that was really a tough point.
Looking back at it now, if you had to go back there and do the same thing with all the experience you've gained, how does it feel, I guess, to reflect back on that now?
I wouldn't do it.
No.
Now I wouldn't do it.
Because there are other ways.
There are a lot of other ways. But at that time, for sure, not having any experience, I made it.
Yeah.
But now there's a lot of different ways and much better ways.
Was there also fear at the time when you had to do it?
Yes, there was fear. And there was also the question, as I returned to Munich in order to make then the diploma project as a graduation project, the first thing that they asked me in Munich, hey, Markus, you were working in informal settlements. Do you have photos? And then there was also this doubt, I mean, what do I do? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is not about, showing photos of poverty. It's just about allowing every person on earth to have a quality in the way the living condition is. And I was really doubting with my diploma project, but I wanted to do it in order to understand the complexity of human interaction. As I was a student, for sure, we were talking about sustainable development. The Brundtland report was already there for already 10 years. So, I mean, that was a term.
Yeah.
But then understanding in Buenos Aires, okay, it's about relations, human and non-human relations that made something sustainable. That was then the driving factor of saying, okay, I do this project as a thesis. But this moment in Buenos Aires, as well as this moment being back in Munich, they created really a certain discomfort.
From which you, in a way, learned an incredible amount about yourself, about, I guess, your values and how to approach things in a more trusting way, what it means to build trust or who you build trust with. Yeah. But thanks for sharing that. It's, I don't know how I would react if I was faced with that. But certainly something worth reflecting upon, because I myself have visited the informal settlements when I was in Brazil, and it was a very eye-opening experience. And I can only recommend to listeners of the show, if you ever get a chance, I think try and visit, because you really see a different side of life. And
You touched an important point that we were always discussing also with the Stuttgart professors, especially with Martina Baum. Should we really do it? Because for sure, if we're traveling with students, we just have 2-3 weeks. But in the end, actually, we can say that the students that came with us, that really acted very, very well. They were very, very reflective. They were really not saying, okay, we have the solution, but really we want to listen, we want to understand. So in that sense, I would also repeat it with a student experience. But what also one of the learning experiences is to always have a good local partner, that maybe also with the way of collaboration, something continues. Because for sure, then the German students return, they do good projects. So there's a lot of learning by the student.
And momentum that you build up through that collaboration.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's good. But also, if you're working in these conditions, these people trust you. So you have to stay. And in that sense, also for sure being now 1 year back in Germany, but the project in the Carcova that stays with me, because there's a handshake between the people from the library and me. And this is not, okay, this is done and now a new project.
Yep.
In that sense, also there is not at the moment, even if a couple of informal settlements ask to collaborate, I can't, because I have this commitment.
Yep, and you have to honor it. But a lot of traveling, a lot of coordination work, and trying to engage really with 300 other people and growing in such a fascinating project. I guess certainly you can offer some tips and strategies to our listeners in terms of time management, right? How do you maintain a balance between the professional and personal time?
I'm really bad in that. I'm really bad in this. But on the other, when you love the things that you do, for sure it's work, but it's not something that I need in order to live a different life. And as said, there are a lot of friendship. There's a lot of exchange. And this gives you so much. This gives you really so much. And in that sense, I hope that for sure you have a very, not just international, but also interdisciplinary audience. But if one would ask me, would you study architecture again? I would absolutely say yes, because it's an amazing discipline. It has a lot of problems by now because maybe of some paths taken over the last 30 years that were not good. Mm-hmm. But it is, as said with Hermann Herzberger, it's about giving space. Yeah. This is one of the best responsibilities that you can have. And in that sense, it's a profession that has a lot of challenges to face, a lot of commitments to make, but it's also a really funny one. And I think this is what you see also in projects. If you have fun in the team, and maybe this was also the collaborations that we share in the projects. For sure, it's about fight, it's about discussion, but it's also about really fun if you share something. And in that sense, time-wise, I'm really bad, but on the other, really sharing and offering yourself as also somebody that wants to learn something, this is still really amazing. And this is what I can just say to the audience, that hopefully everybody of us really loves what he or she really does.
And when it's really fun, then the time somehow manages itself in the end. Mm-hmm. And what advice can you offer? You said you would start architecture again if you were given the chance, but what advice can you offer to young architects starting out?
Just lift the city or lift your environment to all the senses. Recently, we had midterm presentations for introduction into urban design. And students, they really had to show the concepts, etc. And they really made it very nice. And then in the end of the evening, I went down with the elevator from the 8th floor and a student came in. And then she said, well, actually, she's a little bit tired, but now there are holidays. So if I would have an advice for her, that she's getting better in urban design. And I just also said, enjoy the city, enjoy the environment, and look not just with your eyes, but also with all the senses what city is about. And I think cities are so rich in the way we transform the spaces, how we create new spaces, how they change every day, and how people act in this. And this is amazing.
I think that can count as advice for any discipline dealing with the urban environment. I certainly would take on that advice for myself too. And I try to do that in my day-to-day, especially when I travel as well to different cities. And I think that builds inspiration and the creativity that we need to come up with some very innovative, but also very collective solutions, as we've discussed a lot today. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
For sure, still in the University of Stuttgart, in the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning, but also the Studio Urban Strategies. So this is also the Instagram. And recently also, let's say, discovering that LinkedIn is a very interesting professional exchange platform.
Oh, yeah, I like it.
And in that sense, also coming back in contact with former students from the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, seeing what they are doing. But in that sense, yeah, so let's say from the social media, it would be the Instagram account and the LinkedIn, physically speaking, at the moment, the University of Stuttgart.
And we'll definitely put those links in the show notes so that listeners can find out more about you and get in touch if they'd like to. But Markus, incredible story, incredible illustration of the need to really consider what space is, how we can use space in a way for the people, and how we can get the people involved as well. And we've only scratched the surface. You've done so many different projects, and you're incredibly passionate, not just about the people, but also for the nature. And we'll definitely have to revisit this in a part 2 at some point in the near future. But thank you very much for coming on the show. And like I do with every guest, I always give my guests the final word. So one last message to the listeners to take away from today.
One last message just would be listen to your podcast, because I think now the curiosity that you share as a colleague, as a partner with a lot of other people, and giving, let's say, us also this platform of now just having to talk with you, but listening to all these other podcasts. I mean, this is an amazing way of bringing people together. So my advice would be, let's say, if people now listening to my first podcast with Peter, just have a look at the, or have a ear to the others.
Appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Thanks to you. And thanks for inviting me.
And that wraps up our gripping and jaw-dropping episode with Markus Vogl. For more insights into space creation, the latest on his incredible projects, or just a guide on how to taxi and tango through Latin America, check out the show notes for more information over at peterandbach.com/podcast. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning into this episode and for your feedback and support. If you're enjoying this show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow architects. Please also do subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you are listening from to be notified of the latest release as soon as it becomes available. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel Peter Markus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X, formerly Twitter @PeterMBach, or Instagram @PeterMBach87. Feel free to reach out to me with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.